name is Andy Tidy and welcome back to what will be the 10th and final episode of Canal Hunter Series 4. Way back in November 2020 I shot my first video in what I thought would be a short 6-episode series following the old coal route from the pits around Cannock and Hensford through to their marketplace in East Birmingham. The idea was that this would be a short filler series, which would be kind of an interval in my quest to track down the missing 60 miles of the Birmingham Canal navigations, an intricate network of canals that used to extend for 160 miles during the days of the Industrial Revolution. Now I think it's appropriate at this point to give an acknowledgement to Malcolm Brain, whose stories of the old coal boats inspired the series. Sadly, Malcolm's steadying hand at the tiller will be no more because he passed away just a few weeks ago. And speaking for all of those who knew him, this grand old gentleman of the canals is going to be very sadly missed. So farewell, Malcolm, and may the road ahead of you always be a good one. Well, the making of this series didn't quite work out as I planned. What with COVID coming in on one side and constraining my movements, and the wealth of material emerging on the other. So quickly my short series expanded to the 10 episodes you see now. Now, it may have taken us 5 months to reach this point, but we are finally on the last lap. After our diversion to Digbeth in our last episode, we are now heading up the final flight of locks. And do you remember the Boatman's ditty that I quoted to you way back on the Rushall flight of locks? The Moshes 2, the Ganseys 7, the New 13 and the Lousy 11. Well, we are in the thick of the Lousy 11. We've done the 5 garrison locks, and if my maths is right, that means that behind me is the start of a flight of 6 locks taking us up Camp Hill. And that means we go this way. Now, as we start up this flight of locks, I'd like to give you a bit of a word or two about the water supply issues. This is the Birmingham and Warwick Canal, and it was built in 1800. And it was built at the same time as the Warwick and Knapton Canal, and as such operated as a single through route to Knapton on the Hill and then onto the Oxford Canal beyond it. But this was no easy route, because after the climb of 6 locks here at Camp Hill, there is then a summit, and then the canal falls down at Knoll. So the canal ahead is a summit pound, and that needs feeding. There are some reservoirs at Alton, but they were always short of water. And as where we are standing is now at the bottom of the flight of their locks, any water that came down here was either A, going to be flushed straight down into the River Ray and the River Tame, or even worse, it was going to find its way into the neighbouring Birmingham Canal Navigation's waterways. Well, we can't have that, can we? So the canal company decided to build a recirculating pump system, and the pump house was parallel to the second lock up in the flight. The pumping station was built on Bowyer Street, and if you go to the end of what is today a pretty grim industrial street, you'll come across the site of the old pumping engine, and amazingly a well-preserved canal cottage next to it. Now sadly I can't get round the back of the cottages today, but if you look on Google Earth and you look at the old maps, you'll find that the water and the weir structure behind the cottage still exists in exactly the same place and exactly the same shape as when the pumping station was operational. And my working assumption is that there would have been a water inlet somewhere down here near the bottom lock, and there would have been an outflow at the top lock near Sampson Road. Anyway, that's probably enough about the water recycling system. I think it's time to go and explore this flight of locks as they climb straight up to Sampson Road. But before I leave the bottom lock at Camp Hill, a little story of my own. A few years back I was bringing a boat down the Camp Hill flight of locks with a friend. And when we got here to this lock, we discovered it occupied by a boat, just floating here, and the entire crew were sitting out here on the towpath having a bit of a picnic. I thought this was pretty weird, so we wandered around and had a look at the canal behind me. And the whole bottom pound was empty, bone dry. Well, we asked them what the plan was, and they said, well, we've called CRT, and CRT have got the pumps going, so it will refill. I said, have you got any idea about how long this pound is, all the way down to Garrison Top Lock and all the way to the bottom of Ashford Lock? It's about a mile. It'll take days. Oh, didn't know about that. So I got on my bike, cycled back to the top of the locks and opened the paddles to flush some water through. It's what CRT would do after all. And just in case you ever meet the same situation, it takes approximately an hour to fill the bottom pound. But a final word of warning about that particular manoeuvre. If you happen to be the boat in the lock and wanted to get onto the newly refilled pound, do wait until all the paddles have been closed on the locks above you, because they closed the top gate paddles and then started to drain the lock. And of course the water was still flowing down at full bore. So in a matter of minutes, the towpath that I'm walking on was 3 inches deep in water, and it was just cascading over the side of the locks and in real danger of swamping the boat below. I think the moral of the story there is it's good to talk. Anyway, time to get on and get up the locks. We've got a load of coal to be delivered. Well, years ago, Birmingham Council decided that they needed to cut the congestion in the city centre, and so they built a ring road around the outside. This was good, and in fact the ring road that's the result will form the boundary between the clean air zone inside and the unrestricted zone outside. But that rather messes up the Camp Hill flight of locks, because above Lock 4 they will quite naturally follow Lock 3, and that would be straight in that direction. But as you can see, the road gets in the way. And to get around the problem, quite literally, they put a big dogleg into the line of the canal. It's a dogleg which is a little bit tricky to navigate even today without bumping into the sides. But if that's the way we have to go around, we will indeed go around the outside. Ever since I recited the boatman's ditty about the lousy leaven, you may be wondering why on earth it was called the lousy leaven. Well, the canal and its environments was covered in the slime of industry. I remember the time back in the late 1960s and 70s when I used to come through here with my family. We used to be on plastic or plywood boats, and they'd come out of this area covered in grease and engine oil. And within the family, we always used to refer to them as the oily locks. So when I came to Birmingham, I spent quite a long time trying to track down the oily locks. Well, of course, they don't really exist in anything except the vernacular of the tidy memories. So these were indeed the oily locks, the lousy 11. The Boatman had got it right, and it hadn't changed by the 1970s. I'm not really sure that there is any such thing as behind the scenes with Canal Hunter, but this is probably as close as it gets. With the aid of my trusty CRT key, I can access all areas. The service station at the top of the Camp Hill locks is always something of a mystery to boaters who come here. It's probably one of the finest service blocks anywhere on the canal system, and yet of all the places to put it, it's sitting here at Camp Hill locks, a place where virtually no one ever comes. It's a shame really, because it's not a bad area, and I often moor my boat up just in here. Now, of course, there is a bit of a story to this place. There were plans to redevelop all of the industrial units that surround it. And as a bit of a quid pro quo, the developers agreed to pay for a new service block. But the development scheme never took place, so we are left with a rather swanky service block in the middle of nowhere. But if you choose to come here and you want somewhere to moor up, I think you can quite safely moor around the corner or on the water point, because the chances of another boat coming this way whilst you stay here overnight is very close to zero. Well, of course, except when I moor here, and then someone always turns up. Now, the locks may no longer be the lousy 11 or even the oily locks. In fact, the towpath is block paved and as good as anywhere in the BCN. But in my mind, the oily locks persist to this day. Going back a bit further, this canal was never a great financial success. It didn't carry a lot of short-haul cargo. Instead, it relied on long-haul, which was taking the goods from here out to the Oxford Canal at Knapton-on-the-Hill and then on beyond. It was therefore always rather subject to the vagaries of competition. Competition in the form of other canals, such as the Saltley Cut when that was built in 1844. A lot of traffic was then diverted around through the Saltley Cut and onto the Birmingham and Fazeley. That was the bottom road. But where we're standing, this is the middle road, and it is the road least travelled. By 1845, the railways had arrived, and they were offering to buy the line of the canal. But the canal persisted on. These three canals shared a common management, and in the depths of their troubles, Fellows Morton and Clayton were the last major hauliers on the route. And in 1903, there was talk of them taking out a lease to operate the canal for themselves. But the canals limped on as an individual entity until finally they were taken over by the Grand Union conglomerate in 1929. And in a way, this represented the last hurrah for this canal, because immediately after the canal was acquired by the Grand Union, the UK hit the Great Depression of the 1930s. With the country pretty much on its knees, the government initiated a major investment programme in civil engineering. And one strand of that exercise was to rejuvenate some of what they considered to be the more viable canal routes. And in particular, the canal route that linked London with the second city of the UK, Birmingham. The physical impact of this regeneration of the Grand Union route can still be seen. The locks all the way from Calcutta through to here at Camp Hill were widened, as were most of the bridges. But the recession finished, and so the capital investment programme also came to an end, and it came to an end with the project not quite complete. Some bridges were never widened, and certainly the Camp Hill locks were never enlarged. So to the south of this point, it's broad gauge. To the north, for the last little bit, it's narrow. But in this last golden heyday of the Grand Union route, there were about 200 pairs of narrowboats plying the trade north and south. And there are some great accounts of these in various videos that were made in the 1940s, 50s and 60s. Some of the boats journeyed north here with goods from the docks in London and offloaded them for customers in Birmingham, returning with other loads. Particularly, they were sent around the bottom road to pick up coal from the Warwickshire coalfield. This area is collectively known as the Sampson Road Wharf, and it was a combination of the canal and a whole series of basins and arms. The truncated remains of one still exists behind me, and there was another long arm penetrating off behind these buildings. Over time, the technical name for this area became the Birmingham Quay, but to all the old boaters, it was still Sampson Road Wharf. Old boaters don't change easily. Anyway, we have now cleared the top of the Camp Hill locks, and it's time to move our boats on to their final destination at the BSA factory about a mile to the south. And I chose the BSA factory as a destination very specifically. Well, of all the possible destinations for this fictitious load of coal, why have I chosen the BSA? Well, it's a name of a company with which I suspect you'll be familiar. You'll be familiar either for the heritage motorcycles that bore the BSA name, or possibly as the major employer in the area in the series Peaky Blinders. Either way, to my left, as I'm cycling down the canal from Camp Hill, we are entering into the area which was the BSA factory. Whilst BSA is best known for making motorcycles, actually it was founded back in 1861 by 16 gun manufacturers from the Birmingham Gun Quarter, and it was called the Birmingham Small Arms Company. But it wasn't a large reach to go from the manufacture of precision metalwork for guns to other machine tools and implements. It wasn't long before they were making bicycles, cars, motorcycles, bedsteads and other metal goods. The company had moved into the production of cars before World War I, and the names that you'll remember would be Lanchester and, more importantly, Daimler. This proved to be quite a useful sideline, because as we entered into World War I, production was turned back into armaments, and the Daimler motor side was converted into the construction of aero engines for the fledgling RAF. I think actually it was the Royal Flying Corps back then. Well, World War I finished, and with it the demand for armaments came to an end, and so the company reverted to motorcycle manufacture. In fact, they could sell as many of the motorcycles as they could possibly build. But then we rolled into World War II, so production was again transferred into the manufacture of armaments. And also they continued with motorcycles for the Ministry of Defence and folding bicycles for the same purpose. But of course, World War II came to an end, and with it the demand for the military products came to a complete standstill. So the company had to reinvent itself once again. Having got a thriving motorcycle business that had continued in production through the war years, they just carried on. And by the mid-1950s, this was one massive success story. Not only were they selling as many motorcycles as they could make, they were the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. And from that commanding position, what happened next almost brings tears to a banker's eyes. They managed to go from hero to zero in less than 20 years. And the fall in the fortunes of the BSA factory is pretty much mirrored in the fall of much of the rest of the British manufacturing industry. As so often happens when you have a dominant market position, the company failed to innovate. They failed to look forwards, and it was ineptly managed. They thought the good times would roll forever, but they didn't. Come the end of the 1960s and the start of the 1970s. Well, I only have to think back to my own past. When I was in the 70s and I had my first motorbike, did I want a BSA Bantam? Buggery I did. I wanted a Honda, or a Yamaha two-stroke, or maybe even a Kawasaki. Didn't want the old BSA stuff. That's for old men. All these new names and sleek machines were coming in from a newly resurgent Japanese economy, and it was the death knell for the BSA. By 1973, BSA was bankrupt, and as I said, it managed to go from boom to bust in less than 20 years. That is quite an achievement. Now, I'm a historian by passion, but I'm an economist by profession, and my takeaway from this would have to be that even when your business is running at the top of its game, don't stop innovating. The day you stop innovating is the day that your company starts to die. And as I once heard, history repeats itself. It has to, because nobody listens. History repeats itself. It has to, because nobody listens. History repeats itself. Repeats itself. Repeats itself. Repeats itself. Repeats itself. Now that would be a very downbeat way to finish this episode of Canal Hunter. These days, the site of the BSA factory has been completely obliterated. But at the very southern tip of its site, there is one lingering built remains. And that, as is so often the case, is the old canal basin. These days, the basin has been recycled and repurposed, and it has been occupied since the 1980s by the Ackers Trust. The Ackers Trust is a charity which is devoted to the development and inspiration of young people in the area. And there's climbing, skiing, all sorts of activities, including some obviously focused on the canal. And so for years, from the old remains of a once great motorcycle industry comes new ideas, fresh challenges and new opportunities. I said that Birmingham was good at reinventing itself. Have I mentioned that Birmingham is good at reinventing itself? I think I might have. Well, that brings us to an end of this episode and indeed this series 4 of Canal Hunter. I really hope that you've enjoyed following the old coal route through from the collieries of the Hensford and Cannock area to its marketplace here in the East End of Birmingham. This series has expanded way beyond its original remit, but I hope you've enjoyed exploring some of the history of this great and proud city of ours. So until the next Canal Hunter episode, of which I'm sure there will be many, cheerio and happy hunting.